Dr. Veronica Esagui is your host for Authors Forum.
And so a bunch of folks decide to kidnap this fellow and hold him for ransom. And this is the gang that couldn't shoot straight. And everything that can go wrong goes wrong, and it all unravels at the end. But there is a nice surprise ending to it. So.
Good, good. Because so you need to read to know more about what happens. Is this a real model, or did you have anything to do with the cover?
I did not design the cover.
Okay.
The good folks at Inkwater Press designed the cover.
Publishing. And you happy with your publisher?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yes.
Because we talk about good publishers here and bad publishers, and so you had a good experience. That's wonderful. What are the differences between writing a novel, for example, and poetry in terms of the approach, the methodology?
Well, as I say with prose, and now that I'm retired, I have these blocks of time. And I've found that, and the same back when I wrote The Ghost, I was still practicing at that time, but what I did was approach it like a job, that I would get up earlier in the morning and I'd sit down at the computer and I would write for a particular period of time, and I would set a wordage goal for myself for each day. So it'd be 1,000 words a day. Good, bad, or indifferent, it'd be 1,000 words. I might throw them away the next day, but it'd be 1,000 words, and sometimes more. And if you do 1,000 words a day, you'd be surprised how quickly it adds up into something significant. And so you need blocks of time, or at least I do. And I'm a morning person, so I get up early and I write for 3, 4, 5 hours a day. Whereas with poetry, it's catch as catch can. You're gathering the raw material of your poem, and it may come quickly, it may come over a period of days, it may come over a period of weeks, in some cases a period of years. This material that comes together, and then finally you think, well, maybe I've got something here that I could work with, and you start doing the revisions and so forth necessary to see if the poem emerges out of that. But so it's a very different methodology. But,
definitely, yeah.
And both are very satisfying. The poem usually is a surprise when it finally manifests itself.
Yeah.
And that's the gratifying part, is that it is a surprise. But prose can be that way too. And for example, I had no idea how Nockers Up was going to end.
I was going to ask you about that, because when you're writing a fiction, they say in every fiction there's some bits of truth to it. And so did you find that you included some bits of truth of life?
Well, I certainly did. I've had lots of clients who were very similar to some of the characters that find themselves in Nockers Up. But I found I like character-driven fiction rather than plot-driven fiction. And I've found that if I like the characters as a reader, if I like the characters, I'm going to like the book regardless of where it goes. And when you have character-driven fiction, it seems to me that the plot can kind of organically arise out of the characters. In other words, they do what they want to do, and you go with them. Whereas if you have plot-driven fiction, oftentimes the characters are just there to service the plot. And that, to me, is not very satisfying. And particularly if the plot turns to a clunker at some point along the way, and there's great disappointment. So this is a character-driven piece as far as I'm concerned, and that's exactly what I enjoy. That's what I like to read. So if I like to read it, I think other people might like to read that as well. And so that's kind of the basis of the way I operate.
Will there be a Nockers Up too? Or are you working on something else?
I'm working on something else.
No pun intended on the two, but
I'm working on 2 other novel projects, neither of them at all like Nockers Up. I may have gotten Nockers Up out of my system, I'm not sure, but other people have asked me the same question, and it kind of intrigues me that I might find some other setting for the characters.
Yeah, because that's how I felt when I read it. I was like, okay, where's book number 2 next?
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because now you've encouraged me to maybe give some thought to that, because that was so much fun writing that. So, and some of the other things I've done haven't been that much fun. So I'll take your advice seriously.
Good.
Yeah,
I'll look forward to reading number 2.
But I am working on another couple of novels right now. So
you have also written and published personal essays and a full-length memoir that was recently published by West Virginia College of Law. How does that differ from the writing of fiction itself, the memoir?
Memoir is a very interesting genre, and it's become very popular, I think, in the last few years, because I think we're all interested in what happens in other people's lives, because it relates to what happens in our own. And I found writing the personal essays and writing the memoir to be particularly satisfying, because you can approach it with certain fictional techniques, because you are, after all, telling a story, but it's a story that's true.
Close to your heart.
It's a story that has both a factual basis and also a certain emotional validity to it, and so it's very satisfying. But it's also something that kind of sometimes cuts very close to the bone, and so I found it very satisfying, and I think partly because I've reached an age where I can look back and see where I've been and what has gone on in my life, because I've had an interesting life as I look back on it. Other people might not think so, but I have. As I look back, I think, gee, I've been through a lot. World War II, the Depression, on and on and on.
So it's history.
It's history.
It's history.
It's history from a very personal perspective. And I think people enjoy reading about that.
So what do you like most about writing and being an author?
Sometimes I don't like anything about it.
Yeah, that's good. I like honesty.
But generally speaking, I've always turned to it because I felt I needed to turn to it. It's never been an avocation with me or a hobby. It's been something that I have approached as seriously as I approach my profession. And I always viewed my work as a writer to be a dual responsibility to my work as an attorney, even though I did not look to it for my livelihood. So I've never been relaxed about how I approach the art. So sometimes it's frustrating, sometimes it's immensely gratifying, but it just has always been something I was compelled to do.
Was there someone or something that inspired you to write, to be a writer?
Probably lots of folks. My father loved poetry. My older sister was a poet. There were lots of writers in our family, but I think, oddly enough, the most important person in that regard for me was a retired English teacher who lived in La Grande, Oregon when I lived there as a child. She was a member of our church, and she wrote poetry. And she would invite me to her house for what she called refreshments, which was a great lure for me, which would usually be fruit juice and cookies or something. And after school, I would go visit her, and I was 8 or 9 years of age. And she would talk about poetry with me, and I would memorize poems. I had a good memory, and I would memorize Poe and William Cullen Bryant and on. And I would recite them back to her pages after page after page. And I owe a great deal to her. She inspired a great deal of interest. I didn't write poetry at that time, but I loved the sound of it. I loved the music of it. And I had a mentor later on, Richard Hugo, who was head of the writing department at the University of Montana, a wonderful poet and a terrific fellow. And he always said there's 2 approaches to writing poetry, and I think you could apply it to other forms of writing as well. He said, all truth must conform to music. He said, the other approach is that all music must conform to truth. He says, it's almost impossible to be smart enough to write the second way. He says, and he used to cite W.H. Auden as an example of poet who was smart enough to be able to do it. He said, but most of us, the truth has to comply with the music. And I've always felt that the music was the important thing.
So music is in your background?
Yes, it is.
And how did the study of music and your experience as a performer affected your writing?
Probably not in a direct way, but as I say, I think just the musicality of language has always been part of me. And I was a vocal musician for a number of years.
What instrument did you play?
Excuse me?
What instrument did you play?
I was a singer.
Oh, a singer. Mm-hmm. Oh.
I was a principal with the New Savoy Opera Company for 5 years before I went to law school.
Did you ever sing from your poems using your poems? No,
never have. No. But when I decided I needed to support my family, and so I went to law school, mm-hmm. which was a very good decision for me. But I had that background as a performer, and I think when that was no longer available to me, I felt a need to turn to something else, and poetry responded and said, here I am.
If someone wants to look more into your books, is there a website they can go?
Yes, there is, rontalney.com.
Talney, T-A-L-N-E-Y?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that will give you direct access, particularly to Nockers, but also to the other books.
To the other books, okay.
And we'll give you excerpts and also some background on me. And we'll tell you how you can get a hold of the books if you're interested.
Would you just like to read something from your Nockers Up?
I'll read a brief excerpt from Nockers Up, give you and your viewers a little bit of background at least of who's involved. It couldn't get any better than that. For most of his life, Gordon Nockers had disliked his surname intensely. In fact, it had been the bane of his existence, especially starting with his high school years. Sometimes he wished his grandfather hadn't changed it from the respectable old country name Nockowitsky when he immigrated to America in the early 1900s. Surely the old man had never realized what a burden the anglicized version of that name would be for his descendants, and in particular poor Gordy Nockers. He had been the butt of every joke imaginable. That is, until several years ago, when he had the good sense and good fortune to buy the rundown site of a former Denny's restaurant and rename it Nockers Uptown Bar and Grill. At first, business was very slow, but buying the place turned out to be the best move he had ever made. Ophelia Nockers, his ever-patient and adoring wife, even approved when he got the bright idea of turning the place into a go-go bar. Then the money began to roll in. That was long before the entrancing Candy Summers went to work there as a stripper.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You read wonderful, by the way. No, really. I mean, you got your soul in there.
Even with my raspy voice.
Even with your raspy voice, you sound wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
For being our guest. And until the next Authors Forums, have a most inspiring week. Thank you.